Hey guys, welcome back to another session with Hafiz. I am an IELTS tutor from HSAT Education, and today we will be continuing our IELTS training. Now, please note that this is a daily session. We will basically go through different sections, different types of question every day from Monday to Friday at the same time. So around this time of the day, wherever you are watching from, right? And we'll go through, a lot of different types of questions and talk about the tips, tricks, the different approaches, what you guys need to understand, etc., etc. Right? So hopefully, for anyone watching these sessions, it will boost your preparation before taking an IELTS test. Right? Okay, so today we are going to focus on IELTS speaking. We have already talked most of the section. I think the only sections that we haven't really talked about is listening. Apart from speaking, we're going to do that today, right? So this session is just going to be purely about speaking, and more importantly, about how you need to approach the entire section comprehensively, right? Now, different to reading and writing when it comes to IELTS test. Speaking is probably the most risky section, the riskiest section, because you don't really have a chance to fix your answer, right? It's very difficult. Even if you realize a mistake, you want to try and fix it. It's very difficult. It's gonna contribute to your overall score. With writing and reading, on the other hand, you can make time at the end and fix your answer before actually submitting it. With speaking, it has to happen instantly. It needs to come to you naturally, right? And so it's similar to listening, but of course, with listening, the materials don't come from you. You find the answer, write it down, right? You also get only one chance, but all you have to do is find the answer from the materials given to you, aka the audio. But with speaking, literally everything has to come from you naturally, right? You get the questions, and then you have this flexibility to answer them. All right, but we'll take it one step at a time, right? So for anyone watching, if you have any question at any point in the session, please feel free to just comment and ask away, right? I'll try to answer as soon as I can. But everything that I talk about, right, for those who are new to IELTS or who have been preparing it for a while, everything that I'll be covering in every session um, is are all covered in the AJAD education courses. The links is in the description below, so please feel free to check it out. The site, the courses got tons of materials for you guys to use, from training videos, practice question, tips and tricks, even templates. I think one of the most underrated um, piece of materials that you can get from any educational institution, and we have some of the best templates that you guys can use, and it has worked wonders for a lot of our students. So please do check out some of the courses that AJ Education offer. Links in the description below. Okay, so let's get on with the main subject at hand, and that is the IELTS speaking. All right. Now here I have first of all the question format. Right. So in IELTS speaking, there's always three sections. Right. The first part, you have the small talk. Okay. So what does that mean? The small talk, you get pretty much simple but direct questions. It's not one of those questions that you will need to think too long on. Like, it will take you literally 2 seconds to come up with an answer, right? It's pretty quick, pretty precise, right? And it's probably the easiest part of the speaking section. In part two, it starts to get more challenging. You have the 2 minute talk. So you get like a flashcard, right? And or a cheat sheet. It will be given to you. There will be a list or a set of instruction. It will ask you to talk about certain things with very specific questions. And usually the types of questions surrounds around like events, item, people, places. For example, they'll ask you like, okay, think about the last event you went to. What was it? Why was it memorable to you? Who did you go with? Etc. Etc. You will have 1 minute to prepare that answer. So you will take a look at that flashcard and you'll have 1 minute to note anything that you need. And then once the time is up, the flashcard will be taken away. So all you have is your notes. And then you will have 2 minutes to speak in regards to your answer. And the last part is the one that usually will need a lot more thinking, right? Because with part two, you get preparation. In part three, it's similar to part one, but it's deeper. The topics are deeper. So it will expand on the second section, right? But the nature of the third part is a dialogue. It will be two ways. It should feel like two ways. So in the first part, it's simply going to be question and answer. It's like, what do you prefer? Or what kind of hobby do you like? Why? Why not? Etc. Etc. But in part three, it will be like, do you think? Right? Why do you think? Blah blah blah, right? And then there will be follow-up questions from the examiners. Right? So it will feel like almost like a discussion. Well, not almost, literally like a discussion. And the topic will continue. It will expand on what you talked about in part two. So, for example, if in part two you talk about, let's say, uh, school, right? Something to do with school. In part three, it's highly likely that you'll be talking about education as a whole, right? So that's basically the format of the speaking question, right? Now, there are a couple of important pointers that you will need to first understand before we get to the example question. But let's talk a little bit about the important preps. Now, do note that whether you are taking the online format or the paper-based one, right? The preparation is no less important because when it comes to the speaking, like I said, you have very little window to make mistake or not at all, right? The minute you make a mistake, even if you try to correct it, sometimes it gets messier, etc. Right? So two important preps that you have to always remember is that when it comes to test day, please arrive early because it will give you time to just think about, relax, calm down. Just make sure that you have everything you need. Okay. And number two, do not be in a fragile condition. Now, this is technically a generic uh, preparation point because this is something that you do need to do for all the sections. Like on test day, whatever section you're doing, please do not be in a fragile conditions. This is going to be specifically true for listening and speaking, right? Why? Because I mentioned it in I think the sessions where we talk about the listening section. Well, briefly anyway, is that focus is going to be a major factor in how well you do this section because it's very easy to get distracted if you are exhausted, right? You think about your stomach, you think about other things. It's very easy as well if you are like hungry, right? If you just came off the back of some sort of sport, etc., etc. But basically, do not be in a fragile condition. Especially don't eat something spicy literally before the test, right? Remember, you can excuse yourself, like you can ask permission to go to the bathroom, but you will not be given extra time to finish your test. That is for like reading and writing, and also for listening, you won't get, yeah, they won't repeat the audio for you, right? So please come in a very strong condition physically and mentally, right? The only thing that you should be on your mind in test day is just answering the question. The test itself, the speaking section, is not that long. It's literally around 18 minutes, right? So right, you can manage. So come in great shape because you will need that focus, you will need that energy. Okay, now before we go immediately into some questions, I would like to cover the rubric a little bit, just like how we did with the writing section, right? Because understanding the rubric is very essential. Okay, so as you can see, I have the rubric in front of me here, and this is more or less the same approach with the writing section, right? But of course, um, you should be aware that written English and spoken English are different, right? You got different expression, you got different intonation. Even when it comes to the repetition, it will have a different nature, right? So you have to keep that in mind. You cannot have that mindset like some of my students have. If you're really good at writing, you should be really good at speaking. That's not true, right? You might be really good at writing, but you might not be that good at speaking. You might be good at speaking, or really good, in fact, but you might not be that good in writing. So they have two completely different knowledge, approach, style, structure, etc. So please keep that in mind. With speaking, it's a lot more fluid. Like I said, it needs to come from you naturally. Literally, like when you're speaking with a friend, when you're speaking with someone close to you, right? You wouldn't literally speak to someone like that in a written tone, right? Okay, so let's take a look specifically at each category. So, different to the writing section, the first category here is fluency and coherence. Now, of course, most of you probably know what fluency means, right? But in just the gist of it, fluency is basically how confident you speak, right? Because one of the most common, well, I wouldn't say the most common, but definitely the biggest hurdle when it comes to answering the speaking question is the confidence, like stuttering, pauses, and just thinking, even, right? Because if you want to get a band 9, or let's take a look at 8 at least, you need to speak fluently with only occasional repetition of or self correction. Right? Like I said, you have very little room to make mistake. Right? Only little correction, self correction, right? So repetition as well, and you develop topics coherently and appropriately. So that goes into cohesion, coherence. So what does that mean? It means your idea connects. It develops, flows, right? Nothing feels out of place. Similar to the writing part in the cohesion section as well. Your ideas just make sense, right? From one point to another. The way you expand your main idea as well. I'll give you an example, right? This is something that you should not do. Let's say you get a question, um, what is your hobby, or what do you do in your free time? And you go like, I read books. And then you expand on that and you say, I read books because it's the only thing that I can do. And, it's like there's not a lot of things that's as interesting as reading a book. And then you stop there. It's like, yeah, grammatically, maybe you didn't make any mistake, but it's like the idea just isn't interesting. And there's no there's no development there. And the two points that you gave about how you don't have anything interesting, you don't have anything else that you can do, or that nothing else is as interesting as reading a book, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't connect, with each other. So that is not being coherent, right? And fluency, as I mentioned, is stuttering. So if you repeat that answer like this, um, I think in my free time, I like reading books. Um, Basically, because that is not fluency, right? So you need to literally pretend like you're speaking with a close friend. And I'm pretty sure everyone can relate. When you talk with someone who you're very comfortable with, you will rarely stutter. You will speak everything in confidence, usually, right? And that is something that requires a lot of practice. Fortunately, in HZ education, that is something that you can also train, right? We have a lot of really excellent tutors that can help you with that. Okay, links in the description below. So that is fluency and coherence, right? You need to show no hesitation. You cannot stutter a lot and not have any awkward pauses. And you basically need to make sure that your ideas kept keep on connecting with one another. Like you are able to expand, make it sound like it makes sense, or even literally complete one another, etc., etc. Okay, that is fluency of grammar. Lexical resource. So this is also similar to the writing section. That's range and accuracy. So vocabulary range and accuracy. You need to showcase a lot, not a lot, but a variety of different vocabulary. Now, I also mentioned this with the writing. It doesn't mean you have to use bombastic or fancy words, right? Because don't forget, there's also the accuracy part. You only need to make sure that the word that you use is just the most profound one for that context, right? So you don't need to use words like elucidate, dissolution, anything that might have a simple definition at first. Like for example, elucidate means to just explain clearly. You don't need to use that in your answer. Like, oh yes, if I were to elucidate this, no, you don't need that, right? It's fine if you just say, well, if I were to explain it, blah blah blah, right? So be sure to keep that in mind. You do not need a lot of vocabulary. You just need some really good ones that really encompass what you want to say, and it kind of make that essence a lot stronger, right, in the topic, in the subject that you are trying to explain. Okay, and then next is the grammatical range and accuracy, similar to vocabulary. There's the range and the accuracy. So with when it comes to the grammar, you cannot speak in simple sentences. You cannot stick to just one tenses, right? You cannot use the same conjunction over and over again. Keep on If you keep on using and then after that, that doesn't show range, right? And in terms of accuracy, well, you just have to make sure that when you speak, you don't make any grammar mistakes, right? So if you are talking about the present, make sure it's present tense. If you are using singular or plural noun, for example, singular, there should be an s there, or sorry, plural, there should be an s there, and singular, there shouldn't be any s sound at the end, right, etc., etc. Grammatical range and accuracy are pretty clear. And pronunciation, now this is pretty crucial, right? One of the most common question that I usually get from my student is that, will accent affect your performance? Well, that depends, right? How thick is your local accent? Because I have seen a lot of participants, a lot of test takers who who do have accents, right? You can still hear their local accent, but they would go on and score. They went and scored like 8, 9, 7 at the least. When it comes to the pronunciation, it's at the very least that you make sure the word is clearly said. Like there is no misinterpretation of what you just said. Like it doesn't make the examiner go, what was that word that you just said? Right? Or like if you said something and they're not sure what you actually said, right, that means there's a mispronunciation probably. So what's the most important thing to do to make sure that you're not making too many pronunciation mistakes? Well, this also has a connection with the fluency, and that is to make sure you don't rush, right? Do not speak too fast, but also do not speak too slow. So you have to make sure that your pace is controlled just right, to the point where you can hear yourself speak. Because if you do feel like you made a pronunciation mistake, you can self-correct, right? Like the band-aid just mentioned there, right? Occasional repetition or self-correction. You can self-correct, right? But as long as you don't do it more than twice. That's like usually the magic number in IELTS. Like twice is the limit, 2 times is the limit. Okay? And make sure that you're not difficult to understand, that everything you say is very clear. And whether you are pronouncing it in the American format or British format, it's fine. Right? Usually they don't have that significant of a difference. The bigger difference usually lies in actually the word itself. Right? Like in America, they say drugstore. In Britain, they say pharmacy, etc. Okay, so yeah, those are the 4 categories when we, like practice speaking section. You have to make sure that you understand them. Fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, pronunciation. Okay. Now let's take a look at a sample question. All right. We'll start with part one. We don't need to see the entire question just yet, and then the entire section. Sorry. Right. The examiner asks the candidate about him or herself, his her home, works or study, and other familiar topics. That is the introduction sentence of that part, right? So as we mentioned, the first section is small talk. You will get pretty much straightforward answer, right? Let's take a quick look at what the question looks like. How do you usually contact your friends? Right? So the topic is keeping in contact with people. Do you prefer to contact different people in different ways? Do you find it easy to keep in contact with friends and family in your country? Did people in the past keep in contact in the same ways as they do today? Like pretty straightforward questions. Now, there is a standard that a lot of institutions, including agile education, will always recommend you, and that is not to say more than 2 talking points per question, right? Regardless of the part, the only difference is on how you expand the talking point, right? Now, for part one, you can just say 1 talking point. That would be fine. You want to exceed that, 2 is the maximum. Do not exceed 2. That will lean a little bit towards being too talkative or too redundant. Okay, so please keep that in mind, right? And before we actually get to some sample answer on how we approach this type of question, there are a couple of important points that we need to note, right? Okay, so first things first, right? Number one is that, yeah, I am going to write this for the sake of reminder, because a lot of students can easily forget this part, is that please focus on the question. Now, if you notice, right, as I mentioned as well when we were talking about the rubric, there isn't task fulfillment on the rubric section. There's fluency and cohesion. That's the first one. There's no task fulfillment, right? But that doesn't mean you should not try and just focus on what you're being asked, obviously. So number one is focus on the question, right? And only stick to what you're being asked. Do not go be above and beyond. You do not need that, especially in part one, right? Only say what you need to say. That is about it. Now, there is something that might sound a little contradictory, but I promise it's not. And that is number two is talk more, not less. If you are stopped by the examiner, it's fine, right? It's fine. But the important thing here is that you you do not stop at a too soon, right? Especially at a point where your answer just doesn't feel satisfying, right? And we'll get to that in a bit. Like I said, 2 talking points per question. Talk more, not less. The examiner stops you. It's okay. Okay. And the third one is, yes, this is pretty generic as well, but very crucial. You have to sound confident. Don't sound nervous. And one of the clear indicators of someone being nervous is stuttering or long pauses. So, what is the standard? What is that? Can you actually, are you actually allowed to stutter? Well, yes, you are allowed to stutter. It's pretty difficult, especially if you just got started on practicing English, right? But there is a limit, right? There is a limit. You should not stutter literally on every question. That's number one. You should not stutter in the middle of your answers too much. There are some places where stuttering or a simple like that can be used, and it will not impact your answer too negatively. Okay, we'll also discuss that a little bit more in detail later on. But sounding confident is very crucial, right? So I'm just gonna write the criteria here, right? No stutters. Try your best not to stutter. No long pauses. And last but not least, right? Not not losing eye contact. This is also pretty crucial, especially if you do the paper-based test when and you come to the test room in front of the examiner directly, right? You cannot lose your eye contact with the examiner. Keep your eyes on the examiner, right? Do not speak like this. Okay, I'll give you a quick demonstration. I'm looking at the camera right now, and if I were to answer questions like, "Oh, what is your hobby?" Well, my hobby is playing football when I do have the time, usually over the weekend. Constant, very focused, you know, direct eye contact. But if I were to do this, what's your hobby? Well, my hobby is playing football when I have the time, usually on the weekend. And your eyes literally went everywhere. That's not good. Right? That also is a clear indication that you're nervous. Don't do that. So practice, making sure that your eyes are always focused on the examiner or on the person you're talking to. All right. And last but not least, choose the simplest answer. Well, I wouldn't say choose. Let's say give. Give the simplest answer. So, like I said, there will be different questions for each part, right? And occasionally you do get topics that you might get uncomfortable with, and it can also happen on the opposite spectrum, where you get questions on topics that you're very comfortable or that you're very knowledgeable with, right? But the standard is the same for both types, and that is, please give the simplest answer. Remember, this is an English speaking test, not a knowledge test. And like the examiners aren't trying to dive deep into your personal life and try to find out what you like and what you don't like, right? It's just trying to see whether you can answer all the questions effectively, efficiently, delivering it naturally, etc., based on the rubric, right? So give the simplest answer. Now, let's take the first scenario. If you get a questions that you're not comfortable with, or that you cannot relate to at all. For example, I when I took one of the IELTS exam before, I got a question on health, right? I'm not a healthy person. I'm gonna admit that straight up. I'm not. I don't know anything about being healthy, right? And if I were to tell the truth, I would say like, okay, one of the questions, for example, is like, why do you think a lot of people are unhealthy? Well, if I were to tell the truth, well, I think it's because we just enjoy life, right? And I would stop there. Like I wouldn't try to expand on it. It would sound very simplistic, right? Um, and it's like something that the examiner probably won't really connect with as well. So when you get those kind of questions that you're uncomfortable with, or that you're not really familiar with, or cannot relate to, feel free to lie about it. Feel free to pretend on the side that is the easiest to answer. So, for example, if I get that question, like, why do you think a lot of people aren't paying close attention to their health? Okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm a healthy person because I think that's the easiest way to look at it. I'm going to pretend everyone else is unhealthy. So, I'm going to go, well, I think it's just because the lifestyle that a lot of people are accustomed to nowadays, right? There are so many ways where we can easily doze off, sleep around, enjoy the entertainment while sitting down, and not do a lot of productive movements that will basically contribute to our health significantly. So a lot of people would just choose to stay still and just enjoy what they can see with their eyes or what they can feel with their mouth. That's about it, right? For example. So that is something that I'm not comfortable with when it comes to health. There was also a question where I got about arts. I know nothing about arts, and I think it was in section two. I was asked to talk about a painting that I saw recently. I have never seen a painting like in person, right? I may have seen it online, something like that, just accidentally, but I don't have a specific example or a name even, right, that I can see. But I know some famous ones that I am like I know what it looks like. I don't know the details in depth, but I know some famous ones. So in that kind of topic where I can't really relate to, there's always at least one thing that is very common. Like it's like a common knowledge. Everyone will go with that talking point, right? So for example, name a famous painting that you have seen recently. I would go, okay, I'm gonna go with Mona Lisa. Like that's very famous. I know nothing about Mona Lisa, but I know what the painting looks like, and I can just blabber my way through that answer. Like the follow up question was like, how did you feel when you saw that art? Like, do you think it is something that you want to recommend others to see? Well, I'll just say whatever is the easiest to say. I literally did that. I went, well, when I saw that painting, I do felt like there was a lot of creativity behind that painting. It takes a lot of skill to kind of put all together those colors in that kind of shape, that aspect ratio. And if I were to recommend it to other friends, I would definitely do that because this is the painting that we need to appreciate a lot as it is timeless, and even in 10 years time a lot of people are still going to talk about it. And now that's just an example, right, on the top of my head, but nonetheless that is the gist of it, right? When you get an uncoverable, when you get an unrelatable question, you feel free to make it up, right? So as long as you deliver it naturally, confidently, and it makes sense, right, you will get the points. Okay, so give the simplest answer. Don't be complicated. And one thing that I haven't mentioned when we talk about the simplest answer is that like the opposite is true, right? Do not try to use say complicated answers, right? And this is something that I've seen quite commonly among my students. And when they get a questions that they're very knowledgeable with, they would try to say things that sounds really smart. It's like, okay, name a technology that you used recently, and they will go like, "Oh yeah, I used this machine back in campus, and it was very complicated." Now the thing is, yes, that person is knowledgeable, but that person was knowledgeable if he was speaking in his own language. That was one thing that they forgot, right? A lot of the time. So please be careful with trying to be too truthful and just ending up choosing something too complicated. Okay? Now, those are the four main points that I would just like to, get it out there to make sure that everyone is aware. Now, let's take a look here at part one. Right, keeping in contact with people. How do you usually contact your friend? Okay, so for part one, remember this is small talk. You do not need to expand your answer by too much. Okay, for the small talk, it's pretty straight to the point. You can say up to 2 points, but you do not need to expand a lot. Right? What does that mean? 2 points. Right. So let's say 1 point. Right. How do you usually contact your friend? So if my answer, my first talking point is like um, by, let's say, phone, right? The easiest one by phone. So how will that answer sound? So it will go something like, okay, how do you usually contact your friends? Oh, usually by phone. Right? That's 1 point. Now you want to expand that, right? But not add another point, like another main topic. You can, right? By phone. So for example, add just one small detail, one sentence, right? One sentence is more than enough. By phone, right? We would call each other at least once a week. Done. That's more than enough. Right? That's 1 point with one expansion. Right? So how do you usually contact your friends? Like, oh, by phone. We would call each other at least once a week. And then there's going to be a follow-up question. Why? Same thing. Right? So the why, the answer is something like because it's the most convenient. It's 1 point. Right? You want to expand on that? Yes, go ahead. Feel free to add one more sentence that just make your answer a little bit stronger. So, for example, because it's the most convenient, um, we carry it everywhere we go. There we go. For example, like that. All right. Now, when I said maximum 2 points, you can only give two of those, like per question. Right. So, okay, how do you usually contact your friends? Oh, but by phone usually. We would call each other at least once a week. Oh, why? Because it's the most convenient. We carry it everywhere we go. So, everywhere. Realize that. Everywhere we go. That's more than enough, right? And then you can pretty much follow that pattern for every question. Do you prefer to contact different people in different ways? Well, it depends. It depends, or you can say yes straight up. Remember, choose the simplest answer. You can also say no. You prefer to contact different people in different ways. Why? Yes, actually, because I have different kind of friends. Some are close, some are not too distant. Some I would only contact if I need them, right? Something like that. Okay, that's still one piece of information, just one point, and you expand on that. Okay, do you find it easy to keep in contact with friends or family? Right? Yes, no, maybe. It depends. You can say any of those answers. Just make sure that your explanation afterwards, your expansion afterwards, makes sense and it is delivered naturally. So, for example, do you find it easy to keep in contact with friends and family? Right? Yes, I actually do find it very easily because my family and friends, they're always active on social media. They all update statuses like once a day at the very least, so it's not difficult to get a hold of them. Done, right? That's more satisfying. For part one, it's actually better for you to speak to the point where you don't get stopped because this is again small talk, right? Now, on the other hand, for part two, right? That's part one done. Okay, for part two, this is slightly longer, right? You need to talk 2 minutes. It's not gonna be interrupted. You won't get any questions in the middle of your answer. You might get questions at the end after you're done, right? And one of the it's not too difficult, but for newcomers, it is going to be challenging because on test day you're not allowed to bring a watch, right? You cannot see your phone. You probably have a clock behind you, but as I mentioned, eye contact is pretty important. So you cannot be looking at the clock while you're speaking. So you do need to have that sense of how long 2 minutes is, right? Not to say that you should stop exactly at 2 minutes, right? Or you should stop under, or you should not go over. But it's just to make sure that you answered all the question within that time frame. You can talk just a little bit longer or a little bit under, but the most important is to make sure that you cover all the instructions here. So, for example, describe a party that you enjoyed. Now, as I mentioned, if this is not something relatable to you, right, you need to make it up. For me personally, yes, a party is not for me. I don't really attend parties. I don't like parties. Right, it's very noisy, etc. Right, so if I were to ask to describe a party, I can't do it on top of my head. Like, or if someone straight up asked me, from a friend, for example, I would say I'm not really that into party, right? But here I cannot say that at all, right? So the instruction goes: you should say whose party it was and what it was celebrating, where the party was held, and who went to it, what people did during the party, and explain what you enjoyed about this party. So you need to make sure you answer all of those questions within 2 minutes, right? Do not dwell too long on one of the points and ended up missing one of the points, right? Let's say you cover whose party it was, what it was celebrating, where the party was held, and who went to it, right? But you forgot to explain what you enjoyed about that party. Right? Now, can you give a negative answer? Absolutely, as I mentioned in part one, right? For part two as well. Similarly, you don't have to pretend like your all of your answers should be positive. No, you can make it negative, right? You can even use explanations where it might be a little bit depressing. That's completely fine. Yet again, to emphasize the main goal of the IELTS speaking test is to see whether you can answer the questions in proper English, delivered naturally, with very or no mistakes, right? They will not care too much about your substance. So as long as the ideas make sense and there's a development of that idea and everything just connects with one another, there's that fluidity, right, in your answer. All right. So this is just a quick sample. I'm not going to speak for 2 minutes because I only have about 5 minutes left, right? So if I were to just pretend like that I do know party or I've been to a party recently, right? The answer would sound something like this. Um, I will start off with just like the task itself. Like, okay, so I'm being asked to describe a party that I enjoyed. So basically, I went to one of the popular kids party just last week. It was somewhat quite grand because we were celebrating that person's birthday. Right, there were lots of fireworks, food, plenty of food, and that person literally has a house. Sorry, that person literally has a swimming pool, inside his house. So it was pretty crazy. Um, a lot of people went there, but of course, it's a party held by a very popular kid. So usually, not a lot of people knew each other. I mean, I went there just for the sake of fitting in, but yeah, it was pretty exciting. There were a lot of musics and a lot of people were having fun. There were different activities ranging from just people eating all the way to people playing with fire, this fire on the stick juggling around. That was pretty wild. And the thing that I enjoyed most about this party is just how colorful it was. There were lots of music playing, people were shouting, laughing, having a good time, having nice conversation, etc. So it's pretty good. Yeah, done. Right, something like that. Of course, that was not a perfect answer, right? But basically, everything should be mentioned, right? Every of those points should be answered. All right, and my answer just now covered everything. Right now, if I feel like that's still not 2 minutes, right? That's completely fine because once you've stopped, you shouldn't go like, oh wait, I forgot one thing. Right? Try if you've stopped, you stop. Right? If you feel like you need to talk a little bit more, do that before you actually finish. Okay. Um, One thing that I will kind of emphasize as well is that you have to make sure that you try and follow. I wouldn't say make sure, but do your best to follow the flow exactly as the card asks you to, right? Because that will make it the easiest way for you to kind of check that you have done and answered everything in that flashcard. Okay. Now in part three, that's part two done. In part three, it's going to expand on top on the second part. Right now, we'll talk about family parties, national celebration. So the principle, the approach is no different to the previous questions. You have to answer it precisely. You have to focus on just saying 2 points. But the biggest difference probably with part three is that the expansion, you can say more in your expansion, but the main topic, right, should remain about two max. So let's take a look at an example. What are the main reasons why people organize family parties in your party? So let's say the two talking points you want to say are okay. Number one, because it creates a very memorable moment, and number two, it's a very strong culture, all right, in the family. This is something that has been done for many generations. Those are the main talking points. You can expand on those 2 points, right, for however much you want, but you have to make sure that, of course, you're not blabbering too much, right? You're still sticking to those two talking points. So let's say the first talking point, what was it? Yeah, so it's basically something that creates memorable moments, right? And so, okay, what are the main reasons why people organize family parties in your country? I think it's mainly because that is something that creates a very special moment where it's going to be memorable for a very long time, right? When people hold parties, they're not simply wasting time doing something random. It's they're celebrating something very specific, whether that be birthdays, a special occasion, or anniversaries, etc. Right? Those are things that those families would like to remember, and they want to make sure that, even with another generation coming in, things are not forgotten. So yeah, like that, for example, right? So yeah, that is one point that you expand, right? Then you can add that second point. In addition, furthermore, right? In addition, holding parties in my country has always been a strong tradition because it is the best way to involve a lot of people. It is the best way to show that you're friendly, blah, 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 right? So you would stick to two talking points. That's about it. And then you can expand for however much you want, right? Like I said in the beginning, talk more, not less. And in this part, this part is going to be very true for the that point that I mentioned. If you get stopped by the examiner in this part, it's okay, right? Similarly, also in part two. But in part one, I don't think you need to wait until the examiner stops you because you don't need to speak that much for part one. Okay, all right. So hopefully that gives you a clear understanding of what uh, like you need to do. You need to prepare when it comes to the speaking section of IELTS, right? And it is something that is very challenging, especially for those, number one, who are still new to the test. Number two, who has a very thick accent. Like when they speak English, they still bring thick accent with them, which causes a kind of like a difficult challenge in the pronunciation. Right? When you speak, sometimes you pronounce the word, it's not that clear. And last but not least, it's also challenging for those who are very shy, right? Who gets easily stuck with questions that they're not familiar with. So those require a lot of training. And thankfully, in HZ education, right, there is a specific training. There are specific trainings that you can utilize in in the on the website that we have, right? The link is in this in the description below. So if you need any step by step on your own pace training to improve your speaking, your pronunciation, your confidence, Education got you covered, right? Feel free to check out the courses. Lots of videos there, tips and tricks, templates that you can easily memorize that will literally increase your efficiency by 50% or even 100%. So, and it's also money back guarantee. Forgot that part. That's pretty good deal. So if you don't achieve your goal, money back guarantee, no question asked, right? Feel free to check that. Okay, that's my time. Thank you so much, guys. If you have any question, feel free to comment, and I'll see you next session. Right, take care.